So, have you ever noticed that you'll be watching something on Netflix or you'll be talking to someone really interesting and you think their English is really nice? You can actually understand a lot of what they say, but the problem comes when you have to speak, you don't sound like what you just listened to. And that's a little bit strange. Now, it's so normal that we take it for granted, but if you think about it, it's a bit strange because it means there's things that you can understand that you can't use yet. And psychologists, they call this the difference between your active and your passive knowledge. You've experienced this because probably you've noticed that over the years you were learning English really well, and then at a certain point, your progress kind of stopped and it slowed down. And that might have been going on for sometimes 6 months, sometimes one, sometimes 2 years, where you've noticed that the quality of your language is just not getting any better. And this is actually really famous. So this is called the upper intermediate plateau. And part of the problem is that the techniques that you've been using have worked really well to get you to this point. But what if I told you that actually those same techniques that you've been using up till now are actually not the same techniques that will help you move forward? And that's what we do together. So I have been working as a teacher now for 13 years, which means I calculated it the other day. I was quite surprised. It's about 22,000 hours. I've been teaching 35 hours a week for 13 years. So it's a lot of hours. And what it means is that I've seen just about every kind of block that students have when they try and communicate. And what I've learned over the years is a set of really specific kind of techniques based on my experience in the classroom, teaching people just like you who want to learn English and get their English up to a really high level. I've learned a set of techniques that work really, really well. I've also read quite a lot in cognitive psychology and educational psychology and found which of those techniques have the best kind of research base to move you forwards. So I'll give you an example if you like. Have you ever had this situation where you're talking and the conversation is going great? You know, it's going really well, and then you get to one word and you just get stuck. Like you can't remember this word, and it's like a black hole opens up in front of you. I call it the black hole. And the part of the problem is that people use the wrong technique when they have this problem. So what they try and do is they try really hard to remember the word, but probably what you've noticed is it doesn't work. And so instead what you should do is, I call it the 2-second rule. So you've got 2 seconds to remember this word. And if you can't remember it in 2 seconds, just stop and try and explain the word in a different way. Now, that sounds simple, but I can tell you that it takes a lot of practice to get that skill. But if you learn this one skill, it will improve your fluency by about 20%. Just for learning this one skill. And so that's the kind of thing that we would practice together. So here's what I think. I think that learning English can be really fun. It can be really, really interesting. I love learning, actually. And what I'd love to do with you is introduce you to some of the best sources of English that there are. So we'd look at really fascinating videos. There's some great documentaries out there. There's some amazing stuff on YouTube that you can watch. And I would teach you how you can watch those, be really interested in them, but also take the language out of them so that it becomes part of the way that you actually speak. So I call this affectionately moving things from English in to English out. Here's an example of one of the things that we would do together. So I just finished preparing a material on Stephen Johnson's Where Great Ideas Come From. So he gave an amazing talk at TED. He's actually written a book on the subject, and he's written for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And I think his stuff is brilliant. He tells a story at the beginning of the TED Talk, which is just fascinating. So here's the material. So here's the video itself that we would watch. So we'd watch that together, and then we'd take out some of the really interesting vocabulary that he uses. And then we'd use that vocabulary to have just a really great conversation about the kind of ideas that he talks about. So, what do you think about what he says about creativity? How could you use what he says about creativity to be more creative in your own life? What do you think about that amazing story that he told about where GPS comes from?